Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah shir. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We're continuing to learn Hilchas Chalamayid. We'll be learning today Amir Hashem Daf Yud Tes Amid Beis, and we pick up today on the bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch on Yud Tes Amid Aleph with Siman Tov Kuf Mem Zayin Sif Dalid. We have been discussing the halachas that govern various aspects of Avelus, of mourning on Chalamayid. Says the Mechaber in Sif Dalid, Mi shabaloi shmua besoich shloishim yom kaidem haregel. Somebody who receives the news that he lost one of his 7 close relatives for whom he's mechuyev to have avelus for, that he's obligated to hold the laws of mourning for. So he loses a father, a mother, a brother, a sister, a son, a daughter, or a spouse. Those are the 7 relatives that you have to keep avelus for. So, Misha Baloi Shmua B'Say Shloishim Yom Kaidem Haregel. Somebody hears for the first time, he hears the news that he lost one of these relatives, and it is within 30 days of Yom Tov. Now let's remember, we said yesterday, if a relative dies within 30 days of Yom Tov, you're allowed to have a levaya, you're allowed to have hespedim. Over there, you're not refreshing an old avelus, you lost a relative. So if you lost a relative within 30 days of Yom Tov, you make a levaya, you make hespedim, you're going to think about it on Yom Tov because it's within 30 days, you're going to think about it anyway, it's not a problem. If you lost a relative more than 30 days before Yom Tov, then you're not allowed to make hespedim within 30 days of Yom Tov. Why? Because like this, you lost a relative more than 30 days before Yom Tov. So by the time Yom Tov comes around, the mace is going to be mishtakach min alev. You're not going to feel the same level of mourning once Yom Tov comes around. But if now within 30 days of Yom Tov you go ahead and you're maspid, you hold a eulogy for that loss, now you're refreshing the loss in your mind, and now you're going to suffer from it within 30 days on Yom Tov. Now the Mechaber discusses a different case. Now the Mechaber says, what happens if you receive the news that you lost a relative? You receive the news that you lost a relative within 30 days of Yom Tov. This relative may have died more than 30 days before Yom Tov. Maybe the relative died 45 days before Yom Tov. But you first received the news within 30 days of Yom Tov. In that case, says the Mechaber Nirali, it appears to him, Shemuter l'saftai, that you are allowed to be maspid that mace, va'afal pi shehi rechoika, even though the relative really passed away more than 30 days before Yom Tov. I hope I'm not making this overly complex. Normally, if a relative died more than 30 days before Yom Tov, you're not allowed to be maspid that relative within 30 days of Yom Tov. Why? Because you're refreshing the mourning. It's kind of like you're starting the mourning period all over again, and you're going to be in mourning on Yom Tov. But in this case, where you didn't know that the relative died 45 days before Yom Tov, you first heard about it within 30 days of Yom Tov. Then the day that you hear about it is it's akin to the day that the relative actually died, and then you are allowed to be maspid that mace, even though it's within 30 days of Yom Tov. And the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain that the reason for that is, in the first case where we say you're not allowed to be maspid the mace, if you wouldn't be maspid the mace, by the time Yom Tov would come, you wouldn't be in mourning anymore. But over here, you're going to be in mourning for 30 days from the point in time at which you heard of the loss. It's going to take that amount of time for the mace to be mishtakach min alev. So even without being maspid the mace now, you're still going to be suffering from that loss on Yom Tov because it's within 30 days of when you found out about it, even though it's maybe 45 days since the person actually died. But it's within 30 days of when you first heard about it. So therefore, there's nothing wrong with being maspid within 30 days. You're not refreshing the news of the loss. You just found out about the loss. Let's see in the Mishnah Berurah inside. The Mishnah Berurah says, "An ice cut in Zion, nirali shemuter l'saftai." In this case, the Mechaber says, "It appears to me you're allowed to be maspid the mace. Dahamerirus, because the bitterness of the loss Kvar kavua b'libai is already firmly installed in your heart, b'loy ha'hesped, without making the hesped, because you just found out about it. And therefore, v'dinoi kemeis b'shloishim yom, and therefore the halacha in this case is the same as the halacha of when somebody actually died within 30 days, kind of a regel, before Yom Tov, shemutar lahaspidai, kind of a regel, where you're allowed to make hispedim, even though it's within 30 days before Yom Tov. Now we go to Sifhei. The Mechaber says, nearly it appears to me, Shamasha anu noyagim betashlom hashana. The minig that we have, that at the end of the year, from when a relative died, the yahrzeit, we have a minig lispaid hames, to make his spadim for the mace, or lahazkir nishmasai, and to daven for the merit of his neshama. Einoi b'chlal zeh, that is not included in this prohibition of being maspid a mace within 30 days of Yom Tov. You would be allowed to make this yahrzeit commemoration within 30 days, even if the yahrzeit falls within 30 days of Yom Tov, and you would be allowed to be maspid the mace, you could eulogize the mace, and you could daven for the merit of his neshama. You could daven le'ilu nishmasai. Why is this? Says the Mishnah Berurah Nice Cut Ches, or lahazkir nishmasai. What does the Mechaber mean when he mentions over here that on the yahrzeit we memorialize the name of the mace? This is not what we usually refer to as yizkar, where we say a kel mole for the mace. To do that, you're even allowed to do on Yom Tov. Over here, we're not talking about when we say to be maskir the neshama, we're talking about being mispal, davening le'ilu nishmasai. Ois cut test, the Mechaber said, Einoi b'chlal zeh. This type of yahrzeit commemoration is not included in this prohibition that we're speaking of, that you're not allowed to eulogize a mace within 30 days of Yom Tov. Ta'adarabba, over here, quite the opposite. Not only are we not going to prohibit the yahrzeit commemoration, not only are we not going to prohibit it by saying that it's going to make you be nisabel, it's going to make you mourn, quite the opposite. When relatives get together at the first yahrzeit after their loss and they make this kind of yahrzeit commemoration, what they are really doing is declaring an end to the Avelus period. Shaharei Kaidum Lachain, and he says you could see this, at least in the minhagim that they had back then, he said you could see that they're calling an end to the Avelus period, because before the yahrzeit commemoration, before the end of the year, Loiv Shimish Chayrim, they had the minute to wear black. V'achakach mesirenoisam, and then after the yahrzeit they take off the black clothing, v'loiv shim lavanim, and they would put on something white. So you see that they're actually declaring an end to the Avelus period, and therefore we don't have to worry. We don't have to say that we're going to aser this kind of commemoration because it's going to cause you to be in mourning on Yom Tov. Quite the opposite. You're actually declaring an end to the mourning before Yom Tov, and that's okay. Ois katan yud. You're allowed to have this yahrzeit commemoration even though it falls within 30 days of Yom Tov. But on Yom Tov itself or on Chalamayid, you would not be able to make this kind of yahrzeit gathering and make hespedim on Yom Tov or on Chalamayid. That you would not be allowed to do. Now we go to Sivav. Says the Mechaber, Ein kairin al hameis b'chalamayid. We don't rice kriya, we don't rip clothing over a mace on Chalamayid, with certain exceptions. Ela l'kroivav shehem chayavim lehispalelov. Only if you chas v'shalom experience the loss of one of the zayin kroivim, one of the 7 close relatives that you mechuyev to be misabel on. Again, it's a father, a mother, a brother, a sister, a son, a daughter, or a spouse. And chas v'shalom, somebody loses one of those individuals, he does rice kriya on Chalamayid. V'chein al chacham. Also, you could rice kriya on Chalamayid for a Talmud Chacham of great note. Oy al adam kosher, or for an adam kosher. Now we're going to define who these people are. Oy im amad sham b'shas yitzias neshama, or another case where you do rice kriya, says the Mechaber, on Chalamayid, is if you're in the presence of a yid, a stam yid. It doesn't have to be a relative or a Talmud Chacham or what we called an Adam Kasher. A stam yid, if you're in the presence of a yid at the time of Yitzias Neshama, when he passes on, so then you could rise Kriya on Chalamayid as well. Now the Mechaber, I'm going to keep on reading, now the Mechaber delineates different rules for each one of these cases. Va'al karov shechayev lehis abel alav, when you're dealing with one of the 7 kroivim that you're mechuyev to hold avelus for, va'al chacham, or you're dealing with the loss of a Talmud Chacham, kaireya, then you could rise kriya on Chalamayid, afilu einoi befanav, even if you're not in the presence of that individual, elo shabaloi shmua b'mayid, just you heard the news on Chalamayid, imhu b'say shloishim yoyim, if you're hearing the news within 30 days of when it occurred. So again, what's the Mechaber saying? The Mechaber is saying you could rise kriya for one of the 7 close relatives or for a Talmud Chacham if you hear the news on Chalamayid and it's still within 30 days of when the person passed away. Then you could rise kriya on Chalamayid. Va'al Adam Kasher, and if we're talking about an Adam Kasher that you want to rise kriya on, Eina Kareya, you don't rise kriya for an Adam Kasher, Ela im ken yada ben misa lekvura. Only if you find out about the loss between when he passed on and when he's buried. But if you hear about it after the kvura already took place, then you cannot rise kriya, even though it might be within 30 days of when he passed on. It doesn't matter. For an Adam Kasher, you're only going to rise kriya if it's still before the kvura. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here, it's cutting Yud Aleph. The Mechaber said you don't rise kriya on Chalamayid, elo lekroivav, only for one of your close relatives. Ava misha eino chayiv, but if it's the loss of an individual that you're not obligated to keep avelis for, veroitza lekroya, and you want to rise kriya over the loss of that individual, mipnei hakavod, to show kavod to that individual, aser, you don't rise kriya of that type on Chalamayid. If it's an optional kriya, you don't rise kriya on Chalamayid. Va'afilu lekroivav, and even if you're rising kriya nebuch for a relative, dafke imes b'chalamayid, you only rise kriya for the relative if the relative actually died on Chalamayid. Aval imes b'yomtiv, but let's say the individual died on Yomtiv, and Rav Moshe Zecher Tzaddik V'Kadosh L'Vracha says we have to put in the words v'nikbar b'yomtiv, and he was buried on Yomtiv. Aval imes b'yomtiv, if a close relative died on Yomtiv and was buried on Yom Tov, so now it's on Chalamayid and it's after the Kvura, Ein L'Kraya B'Mayid, then you do not rise Kriya on Chalamayid, Ad Achar Yom Tov. You only rise Kriya after Yom Tov. Tehahi Shaita, because now when you hear about it on Chalamayid, but it's already now on Chalamayid, when the person died on Yom Tov and was buried on Yom Tov, lav shas chimum. This is not considered a shas chimum. You're not in the heat of mourning now because you already know about it and the burial already took place. V'lav shas shmuhu. It's not like you just heard about it. You see, if you just hear about the loss on Chalamayid, this is the first time you're ever hearing about the loss, then you could rise kriya. But if the person died on Yom Tov and you're aware of the death already on Yom Tov and the kvura already happened on Yom Tov, now you can't rise kriya on Chalamayid. Eis Konten Yud Beis, the Mechaber said you could also rise kriya on a Talmud Chacham. What kind of Talmud Chacham are we discussing here? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Konten Yud Beis, Al Chacham. What are we calling a Chacham? What kind of person? Sheshoyel onaisai dvar halacha b'chol makom va'omer. We're talking about somebody who you could ask a halacha shayla on in any area of halacha whatsoever, and he will give you a clear answer. Even if he can't exactly go into depth on the rationale of the psak halacha, but he could give you a correct, concise psak on any area of Torah. That's what we call a Talmud Chacham. And the Chavetz Chaim brings down here from the Magen Avram, ve'ein bizmanenu Talmud Chacham kazeh. We don't have anybody who, in our days, who could be called a Talmud Chacham on this level. At first, when I saw this Magen Avram, when I saw the Magen Avram brought down here in the Mishnah Berurah, this puzzled me. Just to mention one, Rav Moshe was somebody who you were able to ask a shaila in any area of halacha, and he gave you an answer. And I think also he was Yedei Alisa V'Litei. So what does it mean that we don't have anybody like that Bismanenu? So one thing that I could think maybe it means is that we're talking about any area of halacha whatsoever, which may include Hilchas Kachim and Hilchas Toma V'Tahara, which they're not applicable to us, unfortunately, nowadays. So you want to find a Talmid Chacham where you could ask him a shaila in halacha in any area of Torah, including Kachim. You're going to ask him some obscure question about the Avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, or you're going to ask him about the halachas of Tumah and Tahara that are unfortunately not negaya nowadays. So that maybe is something that you cannot find. Okay, then the Mechaber said that yes, you could rice Kriya and Chalamayid for all of these different individuals, for one of the 7 Kroivim, for a Talmid Chacham, for an Adam Kosher, or somebody who you were present at the time of Yitzias Neshama. Then the Mechaber said there are differences between the groups. When you're ricing Kriya for one of the 7 close relatives or for a Talmid Chacham, then you could rice Kriya for that person, even Einoi B'fanav, even if you're not in the presence of the mace, and it's just that you found out about it on the Moed. Says the Mishnah Berurah, now the Mechaber is explaining the rules that apply to these groups. You could rice Kriya for one of the 7 Kroivim if you find out about the loss now on Chalamayid and it's still within 30 days of when the person was nifter. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Aval imhu la'achar shloishim, if more than 30 days have passed since the person was nifter, eina kareya b'mayid, then you cannot rice kriya on chalamayid, afilu al avi v'imai, even if the news that you just heard was the loss of a parent, chas v'shalom lo aleinu. Still, you can't go ahead and rice kriya if the ptira already took place more than 30 days before when you heard about it on chalamayid. You could also rice kriya for an adam kosher. Now, what exactly do we call an adam kosher? So, in the Dirshu, in footnote number 24, he says over here, "Ubegeder adam kosher." As far as who we're going to call an adam kosher, Kasar HaShulchan Aruch, they bring down from the Mechaber in Yeridei Siman Shin Mem Sivav, Shehu mi she'enoi chashud al shum avera. We're talking about somebody who there's no suspicion of him transgressing any avera whatsoever. In other words, you mentioned somebody, him, there's no suffix, he's not chashud on any avera. Lashon hara? No, he would never say a word of lashon hara. He's not chashud on any avera whatsoever. V'loy al bittul mitzvah. And he's also not chashud, he's not nechshad, we wouldn't suspect him of ever being mevatel a mitzvah of any kind either. V'layatza alav shem ra, and there's never any kind of ill news about him. He doesn't have an ill reputation of any type. Afal pi she'ein a gadol b'Torah. He might not be a gadol b'Torah, but he's zichar and adam kosher. He's not nechshad on doing anything wrong whatsoever. That's the adam kosher that we're talking about here. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut tesvav. Va'al adam kosher, one of the people that you could sometimes rice kriya on is the adam kosher. V'im amad b'shas yitzias neshama. If you're standing by somebody at the time exactly when he's nifter, at the time of yitzias neshama, chayv l'kraya afilu be'einenu adam kosher, then you would rice kriya for that person even if he's not an adam kosher. V'ayin b'yordei simin shin mem sivav ba'agash enagu l'hakal afilu ba'adam kosher. Lamaisa, halacha lamaisa, we're makel, even if you're standing in the presence of an adam kosher by Yitzias Neshama. Elohim came, we're noig lahakal, that we don't rice kriya afilu ba'adam kosher, even when you hear the news of the passing of an adam kosher. Elohim came, aymin alav b'shas Yitzias Neshama. If you're standing by this type of adam kosher at the time of Yitzias Neshama, then you rice kriya. But other than that, we don't rice kriya for an adam kosher stam, and we also don't rice kriya by a regular person if you're there b'shas yitzias neshama. That's what the poskim bring nowadays lamaisa, that there's no chiyuv to rice kriya when you're by somebody at the time of yitzias neshama. Okay, Now we go to the Ramah. Says the Ramah Haggah, V'yesh chalkim. However, there are those that disagree. And the Mishnah Berurah says in Zayin V'yesh chalkin, there are those who disagree with the halacha of the Mechaber. The Svira Lahu, those opinions hold, the Ein Kriya Klal B'chalamayid, that we don't rice Kriya on Chalamayid for anybody. Not for one of the 7 Kroivim, not for a Talmid Chacham, not for an Adam Kasher, not if you're standing by somebody at the time of Yitzias Neshama. We don't rice Kriya on Chalamayid at all. Continues the Mishnah Berurah says, the B'nai Ashkenaz, people who come, and over here, later on, the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us that B'nai Ashkenaz over here means true B'nai Ashkenaz. It means Jews of German descent. Or B'nai Ashkenaz nagu lases pshara ben elu shtei adeyos. The B'nai Ashkenaz made like a compromise between this Yesh Chalkim brought down by the Ramah and the Mechaber. Or Mechalkim ben ava'im u be'ein shar kroivim. They go ahead and they say that for a father or a mother, you do rice kriya. For the rest of the 7 kroivim, or for a Talmid Chacham or an Adam Kasher, you don't rice kriya on Chalamayid. V'alzeh siyam Ramah, and the Ramah is going to say shortly, we didn't read it inside yet, the mamakam she'ein minig mavur, in a locale where there is no clear minig, yesh l'kroya al kulam, you should follow the psak of the Mechaber, and you should rice kriya on the 7 relatives, on a Talmid Chacham, on an Adam Kasher, or on somebody that you're there b'shas yitzias nishmasai. The meyekar aden halacha gedei rishayna, because the halacha really follows that first opinion of the Mechaber. This means real Ashkenaz, Jews of German descent. In Poland, nagu l'kraya al kulam. Now, we didn't really finish the Ramah, so let's go back up until the Shulchan Aruch and read the Ramah. Haggah v'yesh chalkim, like we just said, there are those who disagree, and they hold not like the Mechaber. They hold that we never rice kriya on Chalamayid. V'nagu b'nei Ashkenaz shaloi l'kraya b'mayid. In Germany, they were not to rice kriya on Chalamayid for ki'im al aviv v'imay, only on the loss of a father or a mother. V'al shara meisim karm la'achar hamayid, and for other losses, they would rice kriya after Yom Tov. V'makom she'ein minig yesh l'kraya al kulam. Now we go to Siv Zayin. Apparently, there was a minig back in the time of the Mishnah of the Gemara that when people were in Avelus, not only would they rice kriya, they would also bare their shoulder. So they would take their arm out of their sleeve so that their whole shoulder is bare. And based on that minig, says the Mechaber here in Sif Zayin, Ein cholzin kasef. We do not bare the shoulder, ela kroivav shalmeis, only the close relatives of the nifter on Chalamayid, v'hamachuyavim lehisabel alav, the shiva kroivim, the 7 relatives that are chayiv to have avelus, oy al chacham, or a Talmid Chacham. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says in Oiskat Yurches and Chosin Kasef, V'ayin b'yardeh simin shin mem sif yud zayin b'haggah. The Chavetz Chaim sends us to Hilchas Avelus in Yeridea, Siman Shin Mem, Siv Yud Zayin, where the Ramah says the Achshav Leinagu Lachleitz Kasev Klal, that we no longer have this minig of bearing the shoulder in Avelus at all. Va'afilu b'chayil, we don't even do it during the week. Certainly, we don't do it on Chalamayid. Says the Mechaber, Sif Ches, Mavrin b'chayil Hamayid. We make a Sudas Havra for the Avelim on Chalamayid. We know the Sudas Havra is the first Suda that the Avelim eat after the Kvura. They don't eat their own food. They eat dishes that are brought to them from other people. So the Mechaber says on Chalamayid, Mavrin b'Chalamayid. We do make a Sudas Havra on Chalamayid. However, it's done a little bit differently than normal. V'hu shalayavru barachava. The minute back in those days was that they would make the Sudas Havra outdoors. It would be before the Aval or the Avelim went back, into the house of Avelus. They would make the Sudas Havra outside. Now the Mechaber says you make a Sudas Havra on Chalamayid. However, v'hu shalayavru barachava ela kroivav shalmeis. Only the close relatives of the mace should have the Sudas Havra outdoors. And if the Aval is eating the Sudas Havra inside his house, he should not. The minig then was that they would turn over a bed, and the Kfiyas Hamita, they would turn over the beds. and the oval would sit on an overturned bed with the legs of the bed sticking up, and that's the way he would eat the Sudas Havrah. But on Chalamayid, the Mechaber says you don't eat the Sudas Havrah that way. You eat it al mitai sekufais, on upright beds. Levisha ein kviyas hamita beregel klal, because there is no din of kviyas hamita, there is no din of overturning the beds out of Avelus on Chalamayid at all. Now we go to Siftes. Al hachacham, if you're holding Avelus for a Talmid Chacham, mavrin hakoil b'chalamayid b'sayich harechava, then everybody that's mourning over the loss of the Talmid Chacham could eat the Sudas Havrah outdoors. Kederach shemavrin is ha'avelim, the way we normally make a Sudas Havrah for the Avelim, shakal Avelim alav, because Gans Klal Yisrael is considered Avelim on the loss of a Talmid Chacham of note. Siv Yud. Oisin kol tzarchei hameis b'chalamayid. You're allowed to do all malacha for the purposes of the mace on Chalamayid. For example, goizes in sa'aroi. You could cut his hair, even though that is a manifestation of the malacha of goizes, of shearing. Umechabsin ksusai. You could wash his tachrichim. So you could do kibus, the malacha of kibus. You could do it on Chalamayid anyway. L'tzarech hameis. V'oisin loy aroin. And you could build a coffin. B'chatzer shabai hameis. But building the coffin is something that you're only allowed to do in the courtyard where the mace is located. Kedeshi yehei nikar shu l'tzarech hameis. So that when somebody walks by and sees you busy with a building project, he'll understand that what you're doing is you're making an aron for a mace. Like this, someone walks by, he sees you building on Chalamayid, he's going to think you're building Sramshrank on Chalamayid. What are you doing? You're not allowed to build on Chalamayid, but if there's a mace there, he understands that you're making an aron. And if you don't have planks of wood to make the aron out of, mevim kairos, you could bring large beams, and you could cut planks out of the beams. Bitzina b'sayich habayis. But that you have to do, bitzina, you have to do it discreetly inside the house. So to build the aron, that you're allowed to do outside in the courtyard in the chutzner if the mace is there. To go ahead and fashion planks, that's already another step removed from building the aron itself. That you're not allowed to do even in the courtyard with the mace. That you have to do bitzina inside the house. Because somebody seeing you forming planks out of beams isn't going to realize that what you're doing is you're making an aron for a mace, and you have a marasayin problem. If the mace that you're doing the malacha for is a very well-known individual, then oisem afilu bashuk. Then you could do these things even out in the shuk, far away from the mace. If it's for the death, if you're preparing for the burial of an adam mefursim, a very, very well-known person, then everybody in the area knows that this person died. And then when they see you doing malacha, they can understand right away he must be doing malacha to prepare for the burial of so-and-so. However, ein karsin eitz min hayar, you're not allowed to go cut down trees in the forest, linsar mehem nisaran la'aron, to go fashion planks of wood for an aron. That's already too far removed from the malacha, from the needs of the mace itself. Someone sees you in the forest cutting down trees, they're not thinking that you're cutting down trees to go make beams, to go make planks, to go make an aron, to go bury a mace. Nor do you go ahead and quarry stones in order to fashion a stone kever. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois cotton yutes, Ois in kol tzarchei mace, you're allowed to attend to any of the needs of the mace, you're allowed to do malacha to facilitate the needs of a mace on Chalamayid. V'toifer in tachrichin, you could sew burial shrouds, afilu ma'isa uman, and you could do this even if it's a ma'isa uman. Lekavod a mace, the Chazal wa matir malacha on Chalamayid. Ois kan chaf, bitzina b'sayich habayis, if you need to fashion planks out of a beam, that you have to do discreetly inside the house. Ve'imi efshe bitzina, if you can't do it discreetly inside the house, oisin b'farhesia, then b'diavad you're allowed to do it even publicly. V'davka b'farhesia delegaba Yisrael. However, you're only allowed to do it publicly if the ones that are going to see you doing malacha are Yidden. Aval b'farhesia delegaba akum loy. But to do it publicly somewhere where non-Jews are going to see you doing malacha, that you're not allowed to do. Afilu b'delay efsher. Even if you're not going to be able to make the burial without this. And the reason for this is we're afraid that if Goyim see you doing malacha on Chalamayid, then Goyim might make you do malacha for them on Chalamayid. Like this, they say, okay, it's a Jewish holiday, you're not allowed to do malacha. But if they're going to see you making planks of wood befarhesia in public, then they're going to say, oh, the Jews are allowed to do work on Chalamayid. If they're allowed to do work on Chalamayid, they'll make them come work for you. However, the Eliyah Rabbah is more mekel, he rules more leniently, and he says that if you have no choice, if the only way you're going to be able to provide the tzarcha hameis is by doing malacha befarhesia, where Goyim are going to see, you're allowed to. If the mace was a very well-known individual, then you're allowed to do malacha even outside in the shuk. Everybody heard about this nifter. Everybody heard that this prominent person passed away. When they see you doing malacha, they're going to say right away, he must be doing it for the mace. In Karsten 8, you're not allowed to go cut wood from the forest. However, you are allowed to go cut a branch of a hadas to use as something that will give a pleasant scent to the mace. Everybody is going to realize that you're cutting a hadas for a mace. But when it comes to cutting down big, strong trees to make planks out of, they're not going to think that you're cutting down the tree in order to go make planks for an aron. They're going to think you're cutting down a tree because you want to build a big building. And that's what you're going to use the whole tree for. That's also even if you're talking about a mace as an adam of fursim. You're still not allowed to go cut down trees. But if you have no choice, you're not going to be able to bury the mace without doing this, then you're not allowed to quarry stones. What the Mechara means is you're not allowed to quarry stones out of the mountainside. But if the stones are already quarried, and you just want to split them, you want to make them smaller stones, and you want to build a kever out of it, then the din is like making planks. So yeah, you're not allowed to go ahead and quarry stones out of a quarry in order to go fashion a tomb out of them. That you're not allowed to do. But if you have the stones and you just want to cut the stones into smaller ones, that would be more similar to taking a beam and cutting planks out of the beam for the use of the aron, which we said is mutter. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schluss of limud HaTorah should be Megan on Gans Klal Yisrael. The Baruch Shem should send Yeshua's, Refuas, and Panasa to all those in need. And we should be zeichet to see the Bias Gael Tzedek b'meher of Yameinu. Amen.